You're listening to the TahoeDeep Podcast, hosted by Chase Petley and Noah Jeremy.
He said, Donnie, there's things out in this lake that nobody has ever seen.
It's impossible to see clearly or identify what kind of fish it is. Fish researchers said while the animal looks remarkably shark-like,
we found a large fish while we were videotaping at 1,100 feet.
Petley is hoping to expand and refine his project.
In 1976, I was out on Lake Tahoe, and we saw something that I cannot explain.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the TahoeDeep Podcast. I'm here with the man, the myth, the legend, Chase Petley, first to film the bottom of Lake Tahoe and deep water explorer savant of the Lake Tahoe Basin, and myself, Noah Jeremy, a much less sophisticated person, but I'm here along for the ride all the same.
Actually, bagged, no, you're a pretty sophisticated person. I'm always impressed by you, bud.
I try to look the part. I wear a lot of hair gel.
Yeah.
I dress nice. I do my taxes, the 9 yards. Anyhow, so in this very first episode of the podcast, essentially we're going to start talking about what makes Lake Tahoe special, why it's so mysterious, why it's so interesting, why we're focusing so much attention on exploring it. And with that being said, I'm going to give the floor to you, Chase.
All right. Well, this is a long time coming. There's a lot of people that wanted us to do a podcast, so I'm glad we could do that. And we could use it as a type of a way we can kind of answer a lot of questions that I've been getting for the past couple of years about this. So with your help and the podcast, I think it's going to end up pretty good. You have kind of a guideline here, but we wanted to start off with what is Lake Tahoe. And so Lake Tahoe is, to me, it's an alpine lake. It's 6,225 feet above sea level. It's an ancient lake, and more than anything, I think the best part about it is it's a mostly unexplored lake. Below 500 feet, there's barely any footage that's ever been taken of the lake, and the resolution of the mapping isn't even that great. So there's lots of exploring left to do in Lake Tahoe. That's why I think it's the greatest place for us to start off our little underwater journey.
Yeah, and just to jump in, Lake Tahoe is interesting in more than one way. It is a tourist hotspot. It's on the border of California and Nevada. It gets 15 million visitors a year. It's a haven for the wealthy. Some of the wealthiest people in the world have their homes or their vacation homes in Lake Tahoe. We're talking $80 million mega mansions with elevators up from the shore. Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook has a mansion there. It's not that far from Silicon Valley. It's a 3 or 4 hour drive. It's only an hour from Sacramento. And aside from the wealthy, it's a hot spot for people coming for vacation. It's beautiful. There's national parks and camping. It's a fantastic place. I know Emerald Bay, this picture right here, is, I believe, the second most Instagrammed place on Earth.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
I think so. It's way up there. Different people give me different metrics, and I remember when you drove me around it the first time, it was just blew me away.
Yeah, even though I'm a local and I drive past it all the time, I can't stop. It's just really, really cool place to look at. You never get old of it. It doesn't get old looking at Lake Tahoe. You never get tired of it. Yeah.
And the really interesting thing about it, just climate-wise, is it's snowy. It gets snow. It doesn't get that cold. It kind of hovers above 0 Celsius, but it does get snow. But you drive like an hour from Lake Tahoe, and you're in the Sacramento Valley, or maybe 2 hours, an hour or 2 hours, and it's where like a whole bunch of the nation's fruit and vegetables are grown year-round. It is bizarre.
Yeah. Huge percentage of America's fruit and vegetables comes from that valley. And on the other side of Lake Tahoe, if you go down the Carson Range, you're in desert, so that's also pretty cool. You can get to lots of different climates within 2-3 hours of this thing. It's I don't know.
It just is someone from Canada who lives in Ontario, where you drive like 6 hours in any direction, it's just the same. It was pretty mind blowing. I remember you told me that you could go tobogganing with your son and then go play baseball in a park within like a 20-30 minute drive in the same day.
Oh yeah, I mean, heck, you can go tobogganing and then go surfing a couple hours later down at the Pacific Ocean if you wanted to. So,
I've heard about that. I just wanted to show this video quick. It's some aerial footage of Lake Tahoe. And a little personal anecdote. The first time I went down to go on an expedition with Chase, we went out in kayaks over 1,200 feet of water and dropped the Sea Lab down. On the way back home, flying, eastwards, kind of northeast towards Ontario, Canada, I flew over Lake Tahoe, but I didn't realize it at the time because I looked down and I thought it was like a coastal ocean. It was so big. And it wasn't until I looked at the map and I was like, that's Lake Tahoe, and just this feeling of like awe and wonder at how big and how incredibly beautiful the lake was. So this isn't loaded very well, but
it's really easily recognizable when you're up in an airplane. And actually, the International Space Station, since it's such an easy to find target, calibrates their instruments from the ISS based on Lake Tahoe. They have some correlating instruments in the lake as far as temperature goes. So,
doesn't NASA have a few arrays in Lake Tahoe itself that they use for measuring temperature or something?
You go out there and you find buoys that are being operated by NASA and some of the local colleges, I think, working in conjunction together. And lots of cool stuff going on Tahoe. You could basically talk all day just about how cool the lake is and how beautiful it is without trying to go into the history or anything else, really.
Yeah. So with that being said, let's move on. There, we got our little shot of the lake. Okay, so once again, Lake Tahoe is situated right on the border between California and Nevada in the Sierra Mountains. And I'm going to pass it back to you now, Chase.
Yeah, so I guess a quick little history lesson about Lake Tahoe. I can tell you what I know, at least from what I understand. The name Lake Tahoe, it's supposed to mean Da-aga. It means edge of the lake in the Washoe Indian dialect. The Washoes were the Indians that populated the area. Although, if you do some deep research like I've been doing, you're going to find lots of conflicting information. Mark Twain, actually, says that the name Tahoe comes from a Paiute word that meant like a bowl of bug soup. And Mark Twain was on record complaining about how he didn't like the name because it didn't represent the lake. And the Washoe Indian thing in general, as far as history goes back, we have evidence the Washoes there 2,000 years ago. But you'll find some Indian myths and legends talking about the Paiutes inhabiting the land before that. And there's lots of conflicting information when it comes to the history of Lake Tahoe. I found that you're going to get a different history if you look up on Wikipedia, bases the collection of old books I've been buying about Lake Tahoe. So, yep, that's...
And just very quickly, how big is Lake Tahoe?
I think it's roughly, so I just got done reading a 1880 survey, and it said 195 square miles is the surface area of the lake. I think that's pretty accurate. I think that holds up. But obviously, you got screen there. It's 22 miles long, 12 miles wide. And it's basically been in that shape, almost that shape, for millions of years. So that's one of the cooler parts. The lake was originally formed... You'll find different information, but I would say between 3 and 5 million years ago. And it's just somewhat what the form is today. And we can kind of go through some things that have changed on the lake as far as its bathymetry and topography, but that's one thing that I think makes Tahoe really unique compared to other lakes in the world. I think the statistic is there's less than 20 lakes in the world that have made it over 1 million years. So...
I know from my limited. I went to school. I'm in the process. Of finishing a degree, and I was doing a minor in geoscience. And I know the average kind of life cycle of a lake in North America is only 10 to 20,000 years old. Most of them came, out of the last ice age, were a result of glacial processes. Lake Tahoe really blows that out of the water. And just to very quickly, because people listening might not know. What's so special about it? Yeah, it's 3 million years. Why do we care? Lake Tahoe is also one of the deepest lakes in the world. It is 1,645 feet deep, I think they have at the deepest point right now. But we don't really know how deep it is.
Yep. I was just reading a book that I can still find scientific references saying the bottom is fathomless. There's just no bottom, but I'm pretty sure for the research we've done, it's got a bottom. But as we'll go into later, I found some spots that might kind of shed some new light on that depth. I think it might be a little bit deeper than people think. So, yeah, so I guess the topography of the lake, if we'll start off, that's a great picture. What you can see on the left is the Sierra Nevada mountain range, and on the right, you're looking at the Carson mountain range. And because these two mountain ranges exist, is what formed Lake Tahoe. We have almost the same picture behind me here. Right here, you're looking at the Western Tahoe Fault. And this is the edge of the Sierra Nevada mountain range, and over here, you have the Carson mountain range. And what's happening is this plate is sliding down as this plate is coming up. And this is where we see the fault lines that I've had on camera that seem to be an epicenter for life. So I think the fault line is a pretty interesting part of Lake Tahoe. And
I have images. Yeah, I have images of the fault lines later, and we can talk a lot more about that.
Yeah, so without going into depth too much, I guess the general topography of the lake and what makes it really neat to me. And I guess we'll start off by just kind of going how the lake is formed. So you have fault blocking. Essentially, you have a fault line, and on to the right of it, it's going down, and on the left, it's going up. And we've seen that on camera. We can confirm that. Around this area where one of the fault lines runs through, I filmed an actual section where you can see one side is up higher than the other. I think about 13 feet is what I've seen. But as far as the classes and lectures I've watched, we can see a difference of up to 30 meters on that zone right there. It moves about 0.5 millimeter per year, they think, on average, as far as that fault line raising on the left side. Another big part of the general topography of the lake is this big section right here, and we'll talk a lot about this because that is the McKinney landslide, and that has a great impact on what the lake looks like today, and that's something I want to investigate farther in the future. I think that lots of the large structures in the center of the lake that are attributed to it are really worth kind of investigating because people haven't taken time to look at those with actual eyes-on cameras. So
I know there is a pyramid structure you've talked about, not an actual pyramid like it was built by people, but just a pyramid kind of uplift structure in the middle of the lake that traditionally has been described as a result of the McKinley landslide. But you have your own theory that that may not be the case.
Well, it's absolutely massive. So the scientific findings of what it is, it's actually a giant piece of granite. Granite that washed over the whole lake through a landslide. The conflicting dates on this are amazing. I've been trying to narrow down when this landslide actually happened. I've gotten dates from 12,000 years ago all the way up to 300,000 years ago. So this whole chunk here used to look just like this cliff face here. Very steep, and after a massive earthquake, it fell into the lake. Now we're talking a lake that's over 12 miles long. And so we're talking about this large block, the size of the Golden Gate Bridge, moving about 8 to 9 miles across the lake. And sure, I guess it's possible, but in my head, I'm not thinking there's enough energy to make it that far. There's not a lot of slope, and something the size of the Golden Gate Bridge moving that far because of a landslide, I just don't see happening, and because there hasn't been what I don't think is enough research into it and people getting eyes on, it's definitely worth going and looking at. I think whatever it is, it's going to look pretty cool.
And what would be your hypothesis, the alternate hypothesis? That it's a product of volcanic activity, or?
Well, I am Chase, the amateur engineer, not Chase the geologist, but I can't help but come up with my own theories. And some of these theories are based off of talking to people in their fields, like some friends that are geologists and stuff that have kind of worked out some of these theories with me. So what we see, you're always going to be going back to the fault lines when you talk to about that Lake Tahoe. So the fault line is supposed to be not active anymore. Volcanic activity was very present in Lake Tahoe. Scientists say that it might have ended 3 million to some estimates are 940,000 years ago. Most volcanic activity ceased. We know what happened in the past, but something that really makes volcanic activity interesting, in my view, is that we have current volcanic activity happening in Lake Tahoe to this day. in North Lake Tahoe, there's hot springs. They're not very popular. People don't know about them that much because they're on private property. But right in the
Do you
lake,
know the
there's
person who
actual
has the hot springs?
No, I
Do you
wish
know
I
the person?
did.
Because I want to do a trip up to the hot springs one day. That's so cool.
We're gonna have to sneak in. We're gonna have to sneak there. 'Cause, they're on North Lake, and from what I found, the temperature of the hot springs could actually reach 113 Fahrenheit, which I think is 55 Celsius.
Wow.
And that's actually in the lake, not even out of it. So that's pretty cool to me. But just having that there points to me like, okay, there's some kind of volcanic activity happening, at least a little bit. And there's some other reasons why I came to the conclusion why volcanic activity might not have ceased. And that is, years ago, on my first time looking at the bottom of Lake Tahoe, we noticed as the camera's going down, you can see what's called thermoclines. Different densities in water is caused by different temperatures. There is a stratus of water, 250 meters. Of the first 250 meters on Lake Tahoe, that is a section of the water that varies with seasons. Below that, it stays extremely constant. Those two areas of water don't mix. And that's well known, but what I found is a different variance at the bottom. Next to the fault line, we can see almost through the high-powered lights going out and watching the cameras in HG, you can see almost shimmery water through the cameras. And that's at the fault line. At the same time, I noticed that there's epicenter for life at the fault line. So those things to me just kind of prove, at least in my head for my theories, that volcanic activity could be possible.
And just to add to the significance of that, if there are volcanic vents, the reason why there'd be so much life around it, and this is not unprecedented, right? One of the kind of leading theories for how life first emerged is from sea-based volcanic vents, and we've filmed and we have footage, and it's well documented in the ocean. Deep sea vents, there's entire new ecosystems that depend on the chemicals and the minerals, nutrients coming out of the deep sea vents, and do not rely on sunlight or anything like that at all. So potentially there's an ecosystem like that in Tahoe if there are in fact volcanic vents.
Yeah, and since we have got life on camera at the bottom of Lake Tahoe, I think it's worth just at least exploring. Another thing, you got to realize with Lake Tahoe is barely any work has been done to document what the bottom of the lake is actually, what's going on down there. I'm thinking, years ago I was the first, when I was 21 years old, to put a camera to the bottom of the lake, and since then there hasn't been very much effort to do it. So that's
and that was
really,
2013, right?
2013. It sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah, around then.
I can't remember.
There was a university trying to do it as well, and you just beat them down there. I think they tried to get it down. It broke halfway, and then you sent yours down and got footage down there.
Well, it wasn't a competition. I didn't know they were doing it at the time. When I found out that they were doing it is when I was on the news, and part of the news report says that they tried to do it and didn't quite make it. So, but they were actually, interestingly enough, trying to go look at the fault line to get some information through USGS. So
note that with an asterisk. We got to film that fault line. We got to film it a few times.
We are going to.
We got to survey
One of the first things we got to do, really, is we got to get that fault line well documented.
So I just wanted to interject really quickly. So you talked about how, depending who you talk to, Lake Tahoe, essentially in its current form, is between 2 to 5 million years old. That being said, the Lake Tahoe basin itself is much older. It was created, it was formed, started being formed around 25, 24 million years ago. So there was something there for a very long period of time. So now understanding that very few lakes at all are older than 1 million years old, we have the Lake Tahoe Basin, and there was likely a lake of some form that goes back as far as 24, 25 million years. So that's very interesting, because once you get back into that time frame, it opens up the kind of life that could be a holdover in Lake Tahoe, right? Like, you hear people talking about monsters, lake monsters in, a lake in mainland United States that's 10,000 years old. And you hear that and you're like, really, that just is not very believable. But then when you hear repeated lake monster legends from a lake that is 3 to 5 or even 25 million years old, that really opens up the possibility. And it's also the fact that it's very deep, because that opens up the potential of this being a safe zone, right? It's so deep that something could survive in this despite all of the climactic geologic disruption happening around it. So, moving on.
Yeah, I think we're going to go into detail about the life of the lake, maybe even a further podcast. But I'd like to note that when I first started building these cameras to see the bottom of Lake Tahoe, I was a complete skeptic. I thought, these people that think there's a lake monster are absolutely nuts. And now I've kind of changed my mind on that, so... But we'll go into that in detail later.
And I personally, I'm still skeptical. I mean, most cases of lake monster sightings are a case of mistaken identity, right? There are very many fish, very many creatures. I mean, even fish in breeding season chasing after each other. I think a lot of serpent legends can come from that, or from some type of eel, or even a large snake. There are so many cases of mistaken identity that can account for it. But there's also new species to find. And if there is any place that's going to have a holdover from an older age, Lake Tahoe is a great candidate.
Yeah, well,
so
I'm absolutely
very
skeptic,
Yeah,
but
very quickly,
that one idea just sticks in my head is that everything's a monster until it's discovered. And I don't think there's lake monsters down there, but I do know there's just stuff being left to discover that we'll find down there. So,
for sure. Sorry for interrupting.
I like
you,
that picture you have there, though. That's a good one.
I just wanted to show this quick video. I think it's 2 minutes long. And it just shows California and Nevada over geologic history. So starting 500 million years ago and up to present day. And I think this is very useful. And for the people listening and not watching, you'll notice that California and Nevada was underwater, was under ocean for millions, hundreds of millions of years, right? And you can look all around Nevada, all around Lake Tahoe. There are fossils everywhere because it used to be coastal sea.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a bit about that, Chase?
Yeah, in Lake Tahoe, you could go up hiking trails. It's not very uncommon that you'll find seashells high up in the mountains, hundreds and hundreds of feet above the lake. But in the video here it's showing America up to the Great Basin, Nevada, Colorado, Utah, being submerged underwater. And it's showing almost like an island chain rising, and it's showing the left side of America slowly filling in, becoming land. And what we're seeing here is a subduction zone pushing up against what is now the Sierra Nevadas, creating the Sierra Nevadas and the Carson Range. It's actually really hard to find good videos of this. I'm glad you found this. One thing that's almost kind of hard to get from the video is you have the San Andreas Fault, and what's left to it is actually moving up north at the same time. There was also volcanic activity happening at the subduction zone right there that later became the California, the valley where Sacramento rests. And the mountain range was a little bit west of where they are now. And by the time all this filled in, there was for a great period where the Sierra Nevadas were actually covered in glaciers too as well. So although Lake Tahoe's been there in its semi-current form for so long, it's the area around it's changed a lot, but Lake Tahoe itself, I think, is really just a safe haven. It's really just, I don't know. If I were trying to play a video game and make a little place where life would exist, I'd pick that spot on the map as far as...
to survive everything.
Yeah. And water,
Yeah, and so my own theory, if there is some holdover in Lake Tahoe, some creature from a prehistoric age, maybe from the age of the dinosaurs, maybe an ichthyosaur or a type of plesiosaur, is it likely? No. Is it possible? Maybe, but let's talk about the possibility, and let's say there is something there. The reason why is because you have this whole area, California, Nevada, that's under ocean for hundreds of millions of years. Slowly, you have the Sierra Nevada mountains rise up and kind of separate. The Lake Tahoe basin emerges, and whatever water is there may have separated off from the mainland, the main sea, and something's there. And over time, as the lake gets deeper, it can adjust to deeper water. Maybe these ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, maybe they can already live in deep water. I don't think we really have an answer to that. But let's say it gets cut off, and then we have all of these crazy climactic changes, geologic events happen, they're able to survive it. And that's how they would exist to this day. You know, the KT, I know there was a big meteor impact in Nevada, and you're trying to find a place to survive that. A very, very deep lake would be the place to do it. We'll talk about this more later on, but I really thought this lays the groundwork really well to understand that why the location of Tahoe is interesting if you want to look for a candidate for cool creatures, because it's so old and there is so much fossil evidence, hard fossil evidence of really interesting creatures around it. And we know if they're gonna survive anywhere, Lake Tahoe, I think, would be the place. I've said this like 8 times, so I'll move on. Probably cut that out. But let's move on to the next one. So yeah, going to what you're saying, to Lake Tahoe is a haven for life, at least for 3 to 5 million years in its current form. With it being deep, with all these changes happening, it'd be a great place for a creature to live, to survive. It's so deep, temperature's not going to change much, right?
Yeah.
While the surface species might get obliterated, anything living in deep water is going to be fine. In fact, maybe they're getting a lot of food to eat from everything dying.
Yeah, and there's other geological, like, the United States has undergone massive changes. If you believe in the Younger Dryas impact theory, most of the basin to the west of to the east of Lake Tahoe was wiped out multiple times. We had glaciation and flooding, and we know that happened for sure. Lake Tahoe, to me, at least from all the data I can find, kind of sticks to my head that it would be relatively unaffected. It would almost be a safe zone for anything living in the area, just to kind of get up to those mountains and stay out of those massive floods. So that's another thing where I think Lake Tahoe is just a nice little safe area.
And here's a nice visualization of just how deep Lake Tahoe is. I think that's supposed to be the Empire State Building. But it's like 1,640 plus feet, and not including the fault lines. Who knows how deep those go? Yeah.
Is that the Empire State Building? I didn't know the Empire State Building was that
I don't
tall.
know. Don't quote me on that. But it's just a skyscraper of some kind. Okay. So let's go back to fault lines. Here we've got an illustration of fault lines in Tahoe. Do you want to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, so even to this day, we have a lot of earthquakes up in Lake Tahoe. A lot of the epicenters are on those fault lines. Recently, there was a couple big earthquakes. You track them down on the little earthquake cider counter website, you see that they either come from Lake Tahoe. Mostly Lake Tahoe, a little bit south of Lake Tahoe, and predominantly a little bit to the east of Lake Tahoe. You find a lot. The Carson Basin and California meet right at Lake Tahoe. So it's a high activity area. Lots of stuff going on there. So yeah, they say that the earthquake was absolutely massive that caused the McKinley landslide. And that would be awesome to see. I believe the tidal wave was said to be over 330 feet tall when the McKinley Basin washed into Lake Tahoe.
And speaking of tidal waves, I know you told me that in actually recent history, human history, there was a tidal wave caused by a landslide that wiped out a whole bunch of ships. And
yeah, I haven't done a lot of research on really the details of this, but I heard from a couple different sources, and mostly just hearsay, that there was a tidal wave that happened in Lake Tahoe because of a small landslide and earthquake kind of situation there. And people had their boats in Emerald Bay. And it was so rough in the lake that even boats were sunk in Emerald Bay. And you'll find just a plethora of boat wrecks from 1850s up to present day in Lake Tahoe. So that's one thing. I think that Lake Tahoe, from a couple sources that I've been reading, is we're kind of due for a large earthquake. I've heard some professors say in their lectures. So we do know Lake Tahoe has undergone some really big earthquakes. They believe 12,000, 5,000, and 2,000 years ago. So we could be lined up for another big one. That's one reason why we need to get down there and look at that fault line.
Yeah, hopefully while we're not on the water. So I think we're coming up at the end of our first episode, and I think to tie it off, let's just move away from the real, the certain, the science, the geology. We've set the ground with that. Lake Tahoe is 3 to 5 million years old. The Lake Tahoe Basin's up to 25 million years old, perhaps older. It's super deep, second deepest lake in the U.S., one of the deepest in the world. Very interesting place. But beyond that, there is a lot of legend, a lot of folktale, a lot of mystery, where the line between fact and fiction is blurred. So we're going to talk a bit about that, tie this off.
Okay.
And then we'll talk a lot about it in the next episode.
Yeah, so if you want to go into the myths and the legends, I guess you want to start with the Indian traditions and stuff, stories.
Let's talk about just the slides. Let's talk about Pyramid Lake first. So Pyramid Lake and Lake Tahoe. Pyramid Lake is another big lake. I think it's 200 miles away. It's in Nevada. It's connected to Lake Tahoe by the Truckee River, but there's a lot of legend about it being connected underground as well. You want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah. I've heard that a lot. People say, oh, you're looking at Lake Tahoe. You know that's connected to Pyramid Lake. And I hear some stories about people losing objects in Lake Tahoe. Later on, they come up in Pyramid Lake, and bodies going missing in Lake Tahoe. It's a pretty well-known story, or at least myth, that bodies that were missing in Lake Tahoe washed up in Pyramid Lake. And there is a river that connects the two. But what they believe is there could be some form of hydrolysis happening, underground waterways. And it seems far-fetched, but we have known evidence of hydrolysis in the area. I believe from Fallen Leaf Lake, every about 600 years, give or take a couple hundred years, there is a mega drought that hits California. And during this drought, Fallen Leaf Lake actually drains into Lake Tahoe through hydrolysis. And one of the last times that this happened, we have absolute rock-solid proof because 150-foot-tall trees grew in the bottom of Fallen Leaf Lake before being rapidly flooded. And we have found those trees still standing in Fallen Leaf Lake. So, do I believe there's a connection between Lake Tahoe and Pyramid Lake underground? Who knows? But I do know that there's lots of proof of caves in the bottom of Lake Tahoe, and there's already proof of hydrolysis. To me, that seems like a pretty far distance, though. But, yeah, it's a possibility.
I know I heard about this. I heard about this somewhere that Nevada has an underground river. And here I have, let me just share this tab instead. One of the world's longest underground rivers flows through Nevada. It's estimated to be about 125 miles long. So maybe we just check it this quickly. Let's see where it is. Ash Meadows National Wildlife Refuge. So why don't we go to Google Maps and see how far that is from Lake Tahoe?
I mean, it really goes to determination. If you got to really define what you would call an underground river. If you go down deep enough in the areas around where I live, everything kind of turns into waterways. Even the mine shaft that's under my house where I'm sitting right now, during these massive water flows that we had, I had that cave open up and spill water into my mine shaft. So you know that there's tons of underwater movement around here.
Very cool. Let's move on, wrap this up, and talk about the last big mystery. So here's kind of a, I guess not a fun one. The fun part is the Godfather. So Lake Tahoe is featured in the Godfather, the lake house, and it's been a legendary dumping ground for bodies for as old as it's existed. There's some pretty dark folk legends about dumping rail workers in the middle of the lake rather than paying them. Did it probably happen? I think unlikely, at least on a mass scale, but you never know. People, it was cutthroat back then, and people were not treated well. But we do know that there are lots of bodies down at the bottom of the lake. People, just average people, making mistakes and drowning. But there's been a lot of legends about it being a dumping ground for the mob. Obviously, Nevada's close by. Lots of casinos. There's casinos right on the lake on the Nevada side. You're looking for a place to get rid of someone who's counting cards. There's no better place than Lake Tahoe. Nobody's going to find them. Nobody's sending anything down to pick that body up 1,600 feet down, right? So, do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah.
Do you have any anecdotes?
Well, we do know that the mob operated in Lake Tahoe. There is underground tunnels that you can see the mob used right around Lake Tahoe, around Howard Hughes' house. We do have the casino still right on the shore. I do personally know law enforcement officers that have rescued preserved bodies from the bottom of Lake Tahoe. Maybe we can get them on and talk about it shortly. I think I actually introduced you to one of my law enforcement friends.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, that guy actually right there, 17 years. I heard the first hand accounts that his family was able to identify him just by seeing his face. He had
was so well preserved.
Goggles. Yeah, he didn't age.
So for those listening, we have a Reuters
one.
article. Yeah, for those listening, we have a Reuters article up. Lake Tahoe perfectly preserving bodies, ? Body of missing Lake Tahoe diver found 17 years later. The remarkably well-preserved body of a scuba diver who sank and vanished 17 years ago in Lake Tahoe has been found on an underwater ledge deep in the mountain lake. And like you said, this body was so well-preserved, the family was able to identify. Full scuba gear, goggles. And there's, I think, an estimated 200 bodies at the bottom of Tahoe.
Yeah, real quick before we get away from that, the theory behind that is that the pressure is so great and the temperatures are so cold that the gases that form in your intestine when you start to, when naturally on land, if you were to start deteriorating, they can't be formed under the water. So the bodies never float, they never come to the top, and they stay down there, and that's why they're so well preserved. But
cheeky baby that just pushed the door of my office open. So I think
baby.
I'll let you talk about missing military aircraft in Lake Tahoe while I go and find his mom and get him off where he's supposed to be.
Sweet. So military aircraft. I didn't know that there's anything of the kind. Really, it wasn't like well known in the area that there's military aircraft lost in Lake Tahoe. Later on, I found that there's military aircraft crashed in the mountains around Lake Tahoe. Then I was contacted by a few people that mentioned a military aircraft that crashed in Lake Tahoe in the 1950s. It was right after World War II, and we know that there was for sure a Naval Air Force landing strip, where the golf course is now by Lake Tahoe. It used to be owned by the military, and the story goes that there was an experimental military aircraft that did a crash landing in Lake Tahoe. So I thought that was kind of an awesome story or whatever, but not very much more than that. Later, I was contacted by somebody from the Navy Archaeology Department that kind of briefed me on it and said, hey, there is a military aircraft in Lake Tahoe. If you find this, we don't want it on YouTube. We don't want it on the news, so I want you to contact me directly. The pilot is still on board. So that really solidified it in my head. After that, I tried researching the story and found, there's a big story behind this. And there's kind of a big story about how that developed. But I think we'll save the whole story because that's an hour-long story by itself. But that's one thing that we want to look for this summer. And I think that's something we have a pretty good chance of finding based on the work we've already done.
Super interesting. All right. Very quickly, Wells Fargo Gold. This is a picture from a book said to be by Donnie Pereira, a 35-year veteran boat captain on the lake, who is joined our team to help us around with the boat. He's been an explorer for a long time. He's a great guy. He's got his own stories, and you're going to be hearing more about him as time goes on the channel. But very quickly, essentially, Tahoe was a hub for logging back in the day. And there weren't very well-developed roads around the lake, so people would just drive across the lake. It just made sense. And so one of I believe the mining the logging company was about to pay their loggers, and they had a barge with a wagon on it with a chest filled with 500 double gold eagles and 200 gold eagles, about $1,200,000 worth at that time, driving across the lake, and it was all fine. But right as they were about to load onto the pier, they hit some turbulence in the waves. The wagon slid off, and it sunk off of a 90-foot ledge to never be seen again. That is the story, at least. They may have just stolen it. But that is the story, and we do know where the location is, and that is a place we're going to go scout out at some point, hopefully find it. $12,000 in gold eagles is worth a pretty penny in modern day. So if we find that, Chase, you'll be able to not just fund your current ROV build, but many, many ROV builds to come.
And
so
we have
fingers
actual
crossed for that.
information. Yeah, we have information that nobody else has, too, about this. I have some older gentleman that contacted me, and I've got more of a trail on the story than anybody else has. He's got a first-hand account with a boat captain who was in his 80s when he passed on his information. So we got some more information to work with, and I think we know the general location. That's quite doable, since the depth might only be about 400 feet deep.
And the guy has a full binder. He was in I believe, the 80s and 90s. This guy was sending down a VCR recorder in a cage to try to film this thing. Of course, it was not capable of withstanding any kind of depth, so he didn't get very far. But let's just say we're hot on the trail for that, and hopefully we'll have some lost treasure to share with, to talk about down the road. So, final legend to tie this off. Tahoe, Tessie.
Legend. Yep. Well, what can I say? It's been a thorn in my side, and it's also been one of my, newer kind of hobbies of actually believing that it could exist. So, been doing this for 10 years and started off being an absolute skeptic. And then as time goes on and people share their stories, but more importantly, the evidence that I've seen kind of leads me to believe that there might be something in the lake that you could possibly describe as a monster. So, I'm not going to say it's a big dinosaur. I'm going to say that there's something down there.
Uncategorized species in Lake Tahoe.
Yes.
And just to be clear, Lake Tahoe, Tessie, is the legendary lake monster of Tahoe. Cited by many, many, many people over time, and we will talk a lot about that as the podcast and the channel moves forward. And that is the end of our first episode.
Awesome.
It was a killer. We went a little longer than 30 minutes, but I think
Way
it was
easier
well
than I
worth
thought.
it. Yeah, and I really enjoyed the conversation. In the next episode, we're going to talk about the creatures of Tahoe, the local wildlife, the legends of what people have seen. We're going to show some of the footage Chase has of the wildlife he's filmed down there. And really, he's the only person who've ever done it, as far as I know. So, Chase, I want to thank you.
Thank you,
for
Noah.
humoring me for this podcast series. I think it's going to be fantastic. I'm really excited, and thank you, everybody, for tuning in. You will be able to watch this just about everywhere. YouTube, if you want to watch video, it'll also be on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and any podcast platform with a pulse. Have a great day.
All right, thank you all. All right, Noah. See you soon.